Some stories don't break, they simply fade. We imagine heartbreak as loud, painful, destructive, but sometimes the saddest endings come quietly, like a whisker you barely hear, like a song slowly turning into silence. Her story begins with silence. Not a silence she chose, but one she slowly learned to live with. Her name was Ava, 32 years old, a quiet listener, a woman who once believed that love just meant being together. When she married Ethan, she thought she had found a best friend, someone who understood her laughter, her fears, her dreams, someone who would sit with her in the dark and still make the world feel bright. For a time, that's exactly what it felt like. They used to take late-night drives along the coast of California, windows open, wind in their hair, no destination, just two hearts moving through the night, side by side. Those drives were their language. They didn't need words, they didn't need promises, just presence. Back then, silence was peaceful, comforting, a soft quiet between two people who understood each other. But silence changes when love starts to fade. They didn't notice it at first because endings rarely look like endings in the beginning. They look like, we'll talk later, I'm tired, maybe tomorrow. They look like small pauses that never find their way back to conversation. Little birds that go missing without anyone asking where they went. Ava would wake up some mornings and stare at the ceiling, wondering when they had stopped saying good morning like they meant it. When did a kiss on the forehead become a polite habit? When did holding hands become something they only did in photographs? There wasn't a fight, no betrayal, no storm, just silence. A silence that grew like fog, not heavy enough to suffocate, but thick enough to hide what mattered. Ethan's been longer hours at work, meetings, deadlines, late-night emails. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant on purpose. He just wasn't present. And Ava's? She became quieter. Not angry, not demanding, just quiet. She told herself, he's tired, he's stressed, things will get better soon. But soon never came, and the comfort of silence gradually became the burden of silence. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Time passed like scenery outside a train window, visible but untouchable. They still lived together, still shared a home, still shared a bed, but they no longer shared themselves. Ava would cook dinner. Ava would eat quietly, scrolling through his phone. They would sit on the couch together, but not together. Two bodies, one house, no conversation. And yet nobody complained. That's the terrible thing about a quiet marriage. It doesn't hurt loud enough to fix. It only hurts silently enough to ignore. Ava began forgetting who she used to be. She used to paint, read poetry, take long walks, laugh loudly, sing while cooking. But slowly, she stopped doing all the things that made her feel alive. When a love grows silent, the people inside it began to disappear. Not physically, not suddenly, but slowly, softly, quietly. Like a candle burning down, not blown out. Like a dream fading before you wake up. Ava didn't know it yet, but the silence was telling a story she didn't want to hear, but one she couldn't escape. Not yet. Not today. This is how endings begin. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with little moments that go unnoticed. And to one day you look back
and realize that the silence has been growing for years. And that's when heart begins to whisper, something is breaking, but no one hears it because silence doesn't make a sound.
Even under the same roof, Ava and Ethan lived in different worlds. They shared meals, yet the clinking of utensils replaced conversation. The couch became a place to sit side by side without truly being together. Good night replaced I love you. Short messages replaced long talks. Silence filled the space where laughter and dreams used to live. Ava tried to reach him. Do you want to talk? I feel lonely. But Ethan was somewhere else, in his emails, in his projects, in a world where her voice didn't reach. Psychology insight. Emotional separation often grows unnoticed. Couples can occupy the same space physically while drifting apart emotionally. Presence matters more than proximity. Nights were long. Ava lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She remembered how they used to plan little adventures, walk hand in hand, drive through the city at midnight. Now those moments seemed distant dreams. Even small gestures, a shared smile, a touch, a gentle laugh, had disappeared. She noticed the pattern forming. Distance replaced intimacy. Routine replaced excitement. Silence replaced conversation. And yet, life went on. Bills were paid, laundry done, coffee brewed, emails answered. The house felt alive with activity, but emotionally, dead. Ava found herself withdrawing too, not in anger, not in spite, but as a quiet defense. She stopped asking for attention, stopped initiating conversations, stopped hoping for closeness that never came. Internal monologue. We're together, but I feel so alone. They were still a couple by name, still shared responsibilities, still existed in the same timeline. But emotionally, they were strangers. Psychology insight. Chronic emotional neglect in relationships can create long-term isolation, even when physical presence exists. The human brain registers absence of attention as social pain, slowly eroding self-esteem and emotional resilience. Ava tried subtle attempts, smiling at him, making his favorite meal, asking about his day. Sometimes he would respond briefly, nod, smile faintly, but nothing meaningful. Nothing that bridged the widening gap. Over time, Ava learned to adjust. She became quieter, smaller, like a shadow. Conversations shrank to logistics. What's for dinner? Did you pay the bills? Don't forget the meeting tomorrow. The love that once felt effortless was replaced by mechanical routines. She began to notice small moments that caused pain. The way he never asked how she felt. The way he laughed at something trivial and she couldn't join. The way evenings ended without a single meaningful word. She started journaling her thoughts, writing letters she never sent, expressing feelings in solitude because no one else was listening. The emotional void was deafening, not loud enough to spark fights, not dramatic enough to demand attention, just quietly suffocating. Psychology insight. Silent emotional withdrawal is one of the most common signs of relational decay. It's subtle, invisible, and often unacknowledged, yet it destroys intimacy faster than overt conflict. She remembered once asking, "Do you even notice me anymore?"
He paused, then replied softly, I'm here. But being physically present is not enough. Presence must be emotional, attentive, and conscious. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Routine consumed their time. Conversations became transactional. Shared experiences shrank to almost nothing. Ava realized something painful. Living together is not the same as being together. Sometimes she would sit quietly by the window, watching the sun set over California streets, wishing for connection that never came. She mourned the intimacy they had lost, the shared dreams, the spontaneous laughter, the feeling of being truly seen, all replaced by silence, distance, and routine. She also noticed a subtle truth. She could survive in this house physically, but she was slowly disappearing emotionally. Internal monologue. If this continues, one day I'll wake up and forget who I am, who we were. Even when Ethan was home, Ava felt isolated. The gap between them wasn't physical, it was invisible, yet thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. And so she learned to live in the space between him and herself, to smile politely, to fulfill duties, to nod, answer questions, keep life moving forward. But silence lingered, a constant companion. A companion that reminded her, love is more than living under the same roof. Love requires attention, presence, and emotional engagement. Ava's story in this chapter is the story of couples everywhere, physically together, emotionally apart. A quiet marriage that continues even as hearts drift away. And that quiet is devastating. Ava was still there, in the same home, under the same roof, but increasingly she felt invisible. She would speak, but her words floated into emptiness. Ethan listened sometimes, nodded, smiled faintly, but he didn't really hear her. Her laughter faded, her joy became a quiet memory. Her presence no longer commanded attention, it blended into the background. She became quiet, not angry, not demanding, just silent, a soft shadow of herself. Psychology insight. Emotional neglect often leads people to shrink, to stop asserting needs, to withdraw as a defense mechanism. This is how partners become invisible before the end begins. Ava remembered the early days. When she spoke, Ethan listened. When she cried, he comforted her. They shared ideas, hopes, dreams. Now, her thoughts were left unspoken. Conversations were minimal. Interactions had purpose only when logistical, never emotional. She would watch Ethan laugh at a joke she didn't hear, or smile at an email he read aloud, and she realized she was no longer part of the shared life. Internal monologue. I exist, but I am unseen. I speak, but no one listens. I am here, but not present. Her emotional withdrawal grew. She stopped initiating plans, stopped seeking connection. Even when she reached out, Ethan's responses were mechanical, distracted. The bond that had once felt so strong was eroding quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. Psychology insight. When a partner withdraws emotionally, the other often mirrors withdrawal. This mutual invisibility accelerates relational decay. Ava began journaling more, writing letters she never sent, because expression, even privately, mattered. She read books to escape. She walked alone in the neighborhood at night, feeling a ghost of the life she once shared. Moments of small joy were fleeting, cooking her favorite meal, listening to music, reading poetry. These were now private acts, silent celebrations of identity she feared losing completely. She tried subtle attempts to be noticed, a laugh during dinner, a gentle touch, asking about his day. Sometimes Ethan responded, but never fully, never with presence. Love without presence is like a candle in the wind. It flickers, but never warms. It illuminates, but cannot sustain life. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Ava felt her identity being consumed by silence, by absence, by invisibility. Even small joys, painting, singing, reading, were abandoned. They felt selfish, unnecessary, because no one truly saw her anymore. Internal monologue. If this continues, I will vanish completely. Not physically, not suddenly, but slowly, quietly, inevitably. The emotional distance wasn't dramatic, but its weight was crushing. Every ignored comment, every unnoticed feeling, every unseen gesture was a brick in the wall between them. Even her physical presence became routine. Ethan didn't notice if she was gone from the room for a few minutes, or if she laughed alone, or if she cried quietly at night. Ava's life became a sequence of quiet survival, silent dinners, silent mornings, silent nights. A home where two people existed, but only one person felt alive. And that one person, the invisible wife, was slowly disappearing. Psychology insight. Emotional invisibility is one of the most profound causes of depression, anxiety, and identity loss in relationships. It creeps in gradually, unnoticed by the partner, unspoken by the person suffering. Ava realized something hard. Being physically present is not enough. Being ignored emotionally is a slow erasure of self. She began preparing herself mentally for a future she hadn't wanted, one where silence might not just exist, but dominate. The cruel truth settled in. Sometimes you can be loved in intention, but unseen in reality. And the person who is unseen slowly disappears. Dinner time had lost its warmth. Ava sat at the table, cooking the meals she once enjoyed preparing. Ethan sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. Sometimes he nodded at her words, sometimes he didn't respond at all. The house was alive with activity, but empty. The kitchen smelled of food, but no one shared conversation. Evenings were quiet, not peaceful, not comforting, just hollow. Psychology insight. Emotional neglect is often invisible. It manifests in small moments, meals without words, nights without connection, and slowly erodes intimacy. They had stopped laughing together. They had stopped planning. They had stopped sharing thoughts and dreams. The evenings stretched endlessly. Ava sometimes tried to initiate conversation. How was your day? Did you finish the report? But these weren't questions about feelings. They were attempts to reclaim a connection that no longer existed. Sometimes Ethan would glance up, give a brief answer, and return to his screen. It wasn't intentional cruelty, it was absence, a quiet, almost invisible withdrawal from shared life. Ava began noticing patterns. Silence replaced words. Phone screens replaced attention. Shared experiences were scheduled out of necessity, not desire. She felt isolated in a home that was meant to be shared. Loneliness became her companion, her shadow, following her from room to room. Internal monologue. Even when he's here, I feel alone. She tried to maintain normalcy, cooking, cleaning, organizing, fulfilling responsibilities, but routine couldn't fill the emotional void. She found herself sitting quietly after meals, watching Ethan scroll, feeling the distance stretch between them. Psychology insight. Chronic emotional neglect causes internalized trauma, anxiety, and feelings of invisibility. The absence of attention communicates worthlessness, even if unintentionally. Ava remembered small moments of the past, sharing jokes over dinner, talking late into the night, planning vacations. Now, even these memories felt distant. They belonged to another life, a life that faded quietly, like the last notes of a forgotten song. The silence wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It didn't create arguments. It simply existed, and it consumed. Nights were even worse. The bedroom, once a place of connection, was now a space where they slept as strangers. Ava lay awake, watching the ceiling. She listened to the faint hum of the city outside, the soft ticking of the clock, and felt the absence of intimacy as acutely as a physical ache. Even small gestures, touching hands, exchanging glances, whispering "I love you," disappeared. They were replaced by routine motions, brushing teeth, checking phones, going to sleep. Internal monologue. I am here, but I am alone. He is here, but he is absent. She began journaling more, writing down her feelings, her fears, her grief. Letters never sent, thoughts never shared. Sometimes she cried quietly, hoping he wouldn't hear. Other times, she just sat in silence, rocking her thoughts like she rocked her own heart. Psychology insight. Emotional loneliness inside a marriage is one of the most painful forms of human suffering. It is slow, quiet, and relentless. It teaches the mind to adapt to absence, sometimes at the cost of self-worth. Ava realized her voice alone could not bridge the gap. Her efforts were insufficient against emotional withdrawal. Silence had become a presence, more powerful than any word or gesture. The cruel truth: love without presence, without attention, without listening, is almost invisible. Yet it destroys completely. And so, she continued to live in the house, with him, but apart. A home filled with food, furniture, routines, but no hearts truly present. Ava tried to speak. She tried to reach, to connect, to share what she felt. But every attempt was met with silence or distraction. A glance at a phone, a nod, a shrug. Her words, once filled with warmth and hope, now fell into a void. Psychology insight. Stonewalling and withdrawal are subtle forms of emotional neglect. They hurt silently, eroding intimacy more than arguments ever could. Ava remembered a time when they could talk for hours. Ideas, dreams, fears, nothing was off limits. Laughter came naturally. Touch came easily. Love was in every small interaction. Now, the deep conversations had vanished. Even the simplest expressions of care were scarce. "I feel alone," she whispered one evening. "I miss us," she said another time. Sometimes he tried to respond, but his responses were half-hearted, distracted, mechanical. The distance remained. Ava began internalizing the pain. She stopped asking questions, stopped trying to provoke discussion, stopped expecting recognition. Internal monologue. If I speak, will anyone hear me? If I reach, will anyone respond? Even apologies became hollow. Even attempts at reconnection felt forced, awkward, and incomplete. Psychology insight. When communication ceases, emotional pain amplifies. Unspoken words accumulate like unseen wounds, affecting both partners' mental health. Ava noticed herself growing quieter. Her presence in the house became minimal. She went about daily routines, fulfilling responsibilities, but her spirit began to withdraw. She tried subtle gestures, a smile, a touch, a question, but each attempt was met with indifference. Over time, she realized the painful truth. Love alone is not enough. Intentions without presence, words without listening, care without attention, these are insufficient to maintain connection. Ava's life became a series of unspoken words. I love you. I need you. I'm hurting. All trapped inside, quietly fading. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake thinking of all the words she hadn't said, all the conversations that never happened, the shared plans, the dreams, the hopes. They were lost in silence. Psychology insight. Emotional isolation is often invisible, but its effects are profound. It causes anxiety, self-doubt, and depression. It teaches the mind to adapt to absence, sometimes at the cost of identity. Ava realized the silent treatment isn't loud, but it screams. The absence of attention isn't physical, but it wounds deeply. The words that were never said became a canyon between them. She tried therapy, tried reaching out, tried small moments of intimacy. Sometimes he noticed, sometimes he responded, but never fully, never truly. Internal monologue. Why is it so hard to simply be present? Why is silence louder than love? Weeks turned into months. Her hope dimmed. Her spirit withdrew further. And she understood. The gap was no longer bridgeable by effort alone. Ava's story is not unique. Many couples experience this quiet erosion of intimacy. Stonewalling, withdrawal, and unspoken words, they are invisible killers of love. And in their silence, Ava found clarity. She could no longer wait for someone to see her. She had to recognize herself. She had to listen to her own voice. The first step towards healing begins with acknowledgement. Ava acknowledged the truth. Love without presence is not love at all. And in that acknowledgement, a new understanding arose. Sometimes, to survive emotionally, you must prepare for a life without the connection you once had.
Ava knew something had to change. The silence between them was no longer just uncomfortable, it was consuming her, eroding her sense of self. She suggested couples therapy. "Maybe someone can help us communicate again," she said softly. Ethan hesitated, shrugged, and avoided the idea. Internal monologue. Trying to revive love shouldn't feel like pulling teeth. She tried small gestures, a note on the fridge, "I love you, let's talk tonight," a shared cup of coffee in the morning, hoping for a spark of connection, a hand on his shoulder, a soft word whispered in passing. But his responses remained minimal, absent, distracted, emotionally distant. Psychology insight. Love without presence or emotional effort can feel hollow. Even the best intentions fail when the other partner withdraws. Ava realized the painful truth. Sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes love without effort cannot survive the weight of neglect. She reflected on the years they had shared, the laughter, the long drives, the shared dreams, all replaced by routine, silence, and distance. She tried talking, gently, repeatedly. "I feel alone, even when you're here. I need your attention. I want us to be close again." Responses were faint, distracted, never fully meeting her emotional needs. Internal monologue. Is love enough if it isn't present? She understood. Emotional laziness is one of the cruelest killers of intimacy. Being there physically is not enough. Effort is required. Presence is required. Attention is required. Days passed. Weeks passed. Her hope dimmed. The spark that had once kept them connected was now a faint flicker. Ava tried one last time. She sat Ethan down. "I want to try again. I want us to be close. I need your presence, your attention, your heart." He listened, nodded, acknowledged, but the effort wasn't there. Internal monologue. Sometimes love is not enough to save itself. Sometimes people love but cannot connect. She realized that continuing to try would slowly erase her sense of self entirely. She could stay in love, but she couldn't survive the emotional void. Psychology insight. Recognition of emotional mismatch is crucial. Sometimes survival requires accepting what cannot be fixed. Ava's heart ached, but she began preparing for a future without him, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. She packed her thoughts, her hopes, and slowly, silently, accepted the reality. Effort without response is heartbreak. She made peace with the truth that love can exist even when connection fails. And sometimes the last attempt to save a relationship is simply accepting that it cannot be saved. Internal monologue. I tried, I gave, I loved. Now I must let go. The weight of realization settled heavily. She mourned not just the relationship, but the person she had been in it, the woman who believed love was enough. And in that morning, she found clarity. She would survive. She would endure.
She would remember herself. The final attempt had been made. The bridge had been crossed. Acceptance had arrived.
The papers lay on the table, signed, stamped, legal. No shouting, no blame, no anger, just acceptance. Ava and Ethan looked at each other. A faint understanding passed between them. They had tried, they had loved, but some things cannot be saved by effort alone. Psychology insight. Silent divorces, without dramatic fights, often reflect prolonged emotional withdrawal and unresolved disconnect. Acceptance becomes the only path forward. Ava felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that she no longer had to chase connection that would never come. Sorrow for the loss of shared dreams, for the love that had quietly faded away. They packed the necessary documents, exchanged signatures, a quiet nod, internal monologue. Love existed once, but it isn't enough to survive silence. No accusations, no recriminations, just a profound acknowledgement that they had grown apart. She reflected on the years, the laughter, the late-night drives, the quiet mornings, all memories now wrapped in nostalgia and melancholy. Ethan spoke softly, "I hope you find happiness." And she nodded. Words unnecessary, the sentiment enough. She realized that divorce isn't always violent. Sometimes it's a quiet acknowledgement that love without presence cannot sustain itself. Psychology insight. Acceptance-based closure is a key step in emotional healing post-divorce. Acknowledging reality without blame helps both parties process grief and move forward. They didn't cry. Sometimes tears run dry long before the relationship ends. Sometimes absence is the loudest emotion of all. Ava understood. Closure doesn't require drama. It requires honesty, self-awareness, and courage. They left the house separately, carrying memories, lessons, and acceptance. The home that once held love now held quiet echoes of what had been. Internal monologue. I survived. I endured. I will heal. And that's the essence of a quiet divorce. No fight, no blame, only acceptance, and the beginning of a new chapter.
Ava walked through the emptying house. Boxes lined the walls, not with clothes, not with belongings, but with memories. Each item she touched carried a story, a photo from a road trip, a coffee mug with a shared joke, a letter he had once written, now folded, forgotten. The house that had been their shared world now felt heavier than any emotion. Memories are heavier than furniture. They linger. They ache. They remind you of what once was. Emotional attachment to objects is common during separation. They symbolize shared experiences, identity, and lost intimacy. Letting go of objects often mirrors letting go emotionally. Ava carefully packed memories. She didn't rush. She lingered over each box, savoring small moments of connection, even if they belonged to a past that could not return. She remembered laughter echoing in the kitchen, late-night talks in the living room, even small, unnoticed gestures, the way he held her hand, the quiet comfort of his presence. Now, all that remained were traces, faint but persistent. How do you leave a life behind when it is made of moments, not things? Packing became an act of farewell, not just to him, but to the version of herself she had been in that marriage. Each box sealed, each memory stored, was a step toward emotional survival. The bedroom, once a sanctuary, was now empty. The kitchen, once alive with shared meals, was silent. Even the walls seemed to mourn, holding echoes of laughter and whispers. Processing grief during separation is essential. Acknowledge the emotional weight of shared memories, allow yourself to feel, and slowly release attachment. Ava realized she had learned a vital truth. Leaving isn't just about moving physically, it's about carrying yourself through the change, holding the lessons, and letting the pain shape resilience. She paused at the door one last time, breathed deeply, felt the quiet ache of departure, and stepped forward. I am leaving this house, but I am reclaiming myself. The boxes were heavy, not with clothes, not with belongings, but heavy with life, love, loss, and the courage to continue. Ava walked out carrying memories, not clothes. And for the first time in months, she felt the possibility of breathing again. Ava walked into her new apartment, the air smelling faintly of paint and new beginnings. The walls were bare, the rooms empty. Yet, she felt a weight she couldn't lift. Even after leaving, the silence followed her. Not the quiet of a home, but the silence left behind by absence, the echo of unspoken words and the void of connection she once had. Internal monologue. I am alone. And yet, I carry everything with me. The first few nights were the hardest. No shared routines, no familiar footsteps, no voice to acknowledge her presence. Even the simple act of speaking aloud felt foreign. Psychology insight. Post-divorce loneliness is common. Even when separation is necessary, the absence of shared life triggers grief, anxiety, and a sense of disorientation. She missed Ethan, not as a partner, but as the person who had been part of her daily life. The memories, small routines, quiet moments were now fragments, haunting yet unreachable. She started journaling more intensely, writing down emotions she couldn't speak aloud, letters never sent, thoughts unshared, but cathartic in their quiet release. Internal monologue. Even though he is gone, the echoes remain. They live in me, in the corners of my mind, and in the rhythm of my days. Therapy sessions began to help. She reflected on her experiences, on the gradual disappearance of her identity and the lessons embedded in silence. Psychology insight. Emotional processing after separation is critical for identity rebuilding. Acknowledging grief, loneliness, and trauma paves the way for resilience and self-discovery. Ava started small acts of self-care, cooking for herself, taking walks, reading poetry, painting again. She was learning to live for herself, to reclaim the joy that had been muted. Internal monologue. I am here. I am present. I can feel. I can heal. She realized that absence does not erase identity, but it challenges it. The silence that had consumed her marriage still lingered, but now she had choice. She could respond. She could shape her own life. She spoke to friends again, shared meals, shared laughter. Step by step, she rebuilt connection, not with him, but with herself and with the world around her. Internal monologue. Survival isn't just enduring pain. It's reclaiming presence, finding voice, and learning to love oneself after loss. The aftermath of silence was painful, but it was also revealing. It showed her who she truly was and who she could become. Ava knew the journey wasn't over. Healing would take time, but for the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of hope. She smiled softly, a small light in the shadow of past grief, and understood even silence leaves room for new beginnings. Ava stood by the window, sunlight spilling across the floor. She breathed deeply, feeling life in her lungs for the first time in months. After months of silence, absence, and reflection, she began the journey of rediscovery. Internal monologue. I am not just a survivor. I am becoming myself again. She started with small things, morning walks, reading her favorite books, painting, writing, and simply listening to her own thoughts. Psychology insight. Post-divorce emotional awakening often leads to higher self-awareness, improved resilience, and better relationship boundaries in the future. Ava smiled at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was the same, yet entirely new. She carried lessons, scars, and strength from a chapter of silence and emotional neglect. Internal monologue. Love needs voice, presence, attention, and first I must give it to myself. Her days became filled with intention, living, creating, and experiencing fully, no longer waiting for validation, no longer lost in another's absence. The past still whispered, but it no longer controlled her. She moved forward with hope, embracing her identity, her voice, her choices. Internal monologue. I am Ava. I am present. I am enough. The journey of rediscovery is ongoing, but Ava knew she could navigate it, one breath, one step, one mindful moment at a time. And in that rediscovery, she found freedom, joy, and a quiet yet powerful sense of self. Ava had walked through silence, absence, and loss. She had survived the quiet endings, reclaimed herself after heartbreak, and rediscovered the strength of her own voice. Now she reflects on what she has learned. Love is not only feeling, it is action, it is presence, it is attention, it is the willingness to truly listen and respond. Internal monologue. Love without voice is like a song never sung, a connection never spoken. It dies quietly, slowly, almost unnoticed. She remembered how silence had crept into her marriage, how small words left unsaid had widened the gap between her and Ethan. Every overlooked gesture, every ignored feeling had chipped away at intimacy. Psychology insight. Healthy relationships require continuous communication, emotional presence, and mutual responsiveness. Neglect, even subtle, can erode connection over time. Ava spoke softly but firmly to the world. Speak, touch, listen. Affection is not optional. Presence is not negotiable. Love requires attention, not assumptions. Internal monologue. Couples must nurture connection daily. Share thoughts, feelings, and care before silence has a chance to settle. She reflected on her journey, from quiet marriage to silent divorce, from emotional absence to self-rediscovery. She had learned the value of voice, both her own and in the hearts of those we love. Hopeful note: love can survive hardships, but only if it is active, present, and attentive. Words, touch, and empathy are not trivial. They are the lifeblood of intimacy. Internal monologue. Do not let silence become the language of your home. Do not let love fade in waiting for someone to notice. Speak, show, feel, and let love thrive. Ava felt peace. She had endured, healed, and emerged stronger. She now understood the deepest truth. Voice, attention, and affection are the pillars of love. The message is simple, yet profound. Relationships live through words and actions. Silence kills. Connection nurtures. Love survives when it is spoken, seen, and felt. Internal monologue. Carry your voice, carry your love, and let the world hear it. The journey ends not with sorrow, but with awareness, hope, and the power to create lasting bonds.